Jamie, how you doing?
Hello, good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's our pleasure. So, Tom, are you ready to get going? Is there anything we need
Yeah,
to do beforehand, or?
yeah. I'll introduce yourself first. I'm Tom. Nice to meet you.
And I'm
See you, mate.
Santi. Good to meet you.
All right. So obviously, Jamie's probably seen in the news recently. There's been a lot of demonstrations like Belfast, and the other night there was also one in Edinburgh and Glasgow. I was just wondering if I can get your thoughts on. Sorry, that question's gone. It's just eluded me there. Oh yeah,
Don't worry.
sorry, but the rise of populism and how that's fueling a lot more distrust in like the politics and why that might translate into more of these demonstrations, especially on the far right, but obviously it's on both sides as well.
Yeah, I think you can see this as a 10 or even 20-year process. I don't think it's a recent phenomenon at all. Um, there's a few things that I think, at least looking at the technology side of it, I mean, there are political problems that are very real and genuine, and people are frustrated about them. It's not all made up, it's not all in people's heads. But what's happened over the last 20 years or so, I think, is that the arrival of brand new forms of media and technology that allows people to coordinate has drastically reduced the cost of mobilizing people. It's far easier for any group or organization to organize, arrange, start a movement. And there is a sort of iron law of technology, I think, that people who are generally outsiders, anti-establishment, they are often quite early and skillful adopters of new technology because they're always looking for ways to circumnavigate the system. And anything that arrives that allows them to do that, they pick it up very quickly. The English Defence League here in England was one of the, if not the first political movement to really understand how to use Facebook to mobilize people. It wasn't the mainstream parties at all, and they have always been just that little bit ahead. I think there's other things. I mean, the entire sort of logic of modern representative democracy has sort of been based on an assumption of some degree of shared and to some extent controlled, gate-kept knowledge. That we where we all agreed on certain commonly held assumptions and facts. We consumed media in a very particular way. We'd have certain disagreements about things, of course, but we'd all tend to believe that there were shared facts about the world and shared an understanding of how the world worked. And a really simple and crass way of putting it is that modern information technology has just exploded that, has just put a bomb in it and destroyed it entirely. Um, and in some ways has monetized the production and the sharing of information that has no basis in reality whatsoever. I mean, if you think that the sort of logic of what works on social media is emotive, viral, often anger-inducing content. Therefore, we have seen more of it as that form of communication has become more prominent. And I argued in 2012 that the business incentive, the business model of social media, was far better aligned with populist movements than with boring mainstream political movements. And that it would be radical movements on the fringes who would be better suited to use this technology to help their message get out. If you think about it, what works on social media? Short, snappy, emotive, increasingly visual imagery and messaging. That is the style of populism. I see it as a style of content. And so I think when you step back and look at it, it unfortunately all becomes fairly predictable. If you think that John F. Kennedy became president in 1962 because no, what did he win the election? 1960, I think. You have to correct me and edit me with a deep fake, because he was in a way the first sort of telegenetic president. It was the first election where the majority of people in the US had access to a television and consumed their politics through TV. And he's, the most handsome politician that's ever lived. Um, and it's been well reported that in the famous debates between Nixon and Kennedy in 1960, people listening on the radio thought that Nixon had won. People watching on TV thought Kennedy had won. But TV was now the predominant media in America, and so Kennedy won the election. And so I think you can unfortunately see politics as the political style of the day as a very natural result of the information ecosystem of today.
Yeah, and there's an interesting point you're saying about populism. Do you think that's also translated into, like you said before, AI can be flattered into the user? Do you think that's in a way making the user the populist leader? It doesn't really offer much resistance to what's been input to it.
I think a fascinating question for your generation to work out is going to be if Donald Trump is the archetypal social media politician, who is the archetypal politician in the age of artificial intelligence? What style of politics and style of communication is going to be best suited for a world in which anything can be produced by anyone at scale and to look almost um, indistinguishable from the real thing, and in a world where people aren't going to care that much whether it's real or machine generated. Who's the political person that wins in that world? And I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that will be a question that you guys will be grappling with in 10 years' time.
I mean, potentially, and well, in the case of many of our politicians now, we are seeing AI starting to trickle in to our sort of political discourse. Obviously, Donald Trump uses a lot of AI in his campaigning. Is that something that you would have an objection to? Are there ways in which AI can be used for good in campaigning?
That's a very good question. At the moment, I think we in the same way that I said the English Defence League were the pioneers of Facebook as a medium for political organisation. It is the people that you again are considered anti-establishment who I think are doing the early running on how to use AI. Um, and
Yeah.
take, for example, the Donald Trump frequently shares content that he knows to be fake. He will create deep fakes. I mean, they're not even very believable of his political opponents saying certain things. He doesn't pretend they're real. His supporters don't think they're real. We all know they're fake, but it still serves a purpose. When he has Hakeem Jeffries saying certain things about the world that Hakeem Jeffries never said and that are ludicrous, to Trump supporters, it doesn't really matter because Hakeem Jeffries is saying things that his supporters think Hakeem Jeffries really believes anyway. He might
Yeah.
not have said it, but it's the sort of thing he might say, and therefore it is true in an emotional sense. And we also know that if you flood people's feeds with content that they even know to be false or machine generated, it can still affect people's opinions about the world. If you see repeated fake videos that you know to be fake of criminals in London, even when you know they're fake, if you see enough of them, it will start to change your opinion about criminality in London. And people like Donald Trump know that. They know that truth isn't really a barrier to changing people's minds. And this is the way I see that AI is currently mostly being used in politics as an easy way, en masse, to shift opinion openly by using fakery. How a sensible, fact-based political movement thinks about how to use AI in a different way, I have not seen it yet. I am sure there are ways.
Right, yeah, of course. No, so building on that, I mean, you've touched upon this already, but what would you say misinformation means to you as a term?
I have quite maybe a slightly different view on this to a lot of people because I have spent so long with people who many would say push disinformation or misinformation, who push fake news or believe a false narrative about the world. And in my opinion, what they generally do is that they don't necessarily just automatically believe fake news. What they would tend to do is share or read content which is broadly true. They'll read articles from all the mainstream newspapers, but they get very focused on one particular subject. Particularly at the moment, it's to do with crime and immigration, or birth rates, or COVID, or whatever. And any kind of worldview that is juxtaposed against the establishment. So anything that's anti-establishment, and particularly that involves immigration. They will then read several true stories of problems about this. They will read stories about, it's hard to deny that there was an individual of Sudanese origin yesterday in Belfast who was wielding a knife and attacked somebody. But they will read dozens of true stories like that from all around the world. They'll then piece them together, weave them into a single narrative, which is then quite a misleading representation of how the world really is. And so individual pieces of content aren't necessarily misinformation, but the collective sum total can be quite misleading about the world. And I think that's more useful in terms of understanding the ideas of misinformation or disinformation than arguing that people are just pushing falsity all the time, because it is a bit more subtle than that. There is, of course, intentional, deliberate creation and sharing of information that is known to be false by certain movements to serve a political end. That has always been around. I see that everywhere. But I don't necessarily believe that is always the most common form of what we'd understand to be misinformation.
Do you think this is a perfect environment for misinformation to thrive? Because, like you're saying at the start, it's not a new thing, it has been going on for decades. Some experts have attributed it to like neoliberalism, Reaganomics, and Thatcherism, and making everything about the individual. And obviously, online social media just kind of heightens the fact that you get something tailored to you. Do you think in that environment, that's why misinformation thrives?
Yeah, I like to think of it as a combination. I think there are long-term trends. Some of it you could say, neoliberalism making the world about the entire world revolves around the individual. You could also say that broader social movements from the left to do with individual rights and individuals. I find Oprah Winfrey and her notion of everyone having their own truth and their sort of emotional truth, how the world appears and feels to them, is on a par with some kind of objective understanding of the world. So the sort of the push towards the individual at the center of the universe has come from both left and right for the last 20 or 30 years. But I think the key driver has been the fact that you are incentivized to share content which is likely to be shared by other people. It is a business model. And there is no real incentive for the companies to push content that's truthful over content that is viral or that is shareable. And you might not notice it by virtue of any single piece of content or any single decision that anyone has taken. But when you look at over 15 years of living in a world where content that is more shareable is more likely to be seen and consumed, and people are incentivized to create and share that over careful, thoughtful, long form, boring journalism, I think it's had a huge impact on how we all see the world around us. I think when you put those things together, yes, I mean you could call it a perfect storm. If you, I don't know what really how to just what phrase really fits the bill, but I think we also have to be honest that I think a lot of our political institutions around the world are failing. They have been designed, they were created in a very different world to the world we now live in. Our politics is still mostly analog. Our police forces are now mostly geographically based. How can the police genuinely prosecute crime when 45% of it is online fraud committed often overseas, or the perpetrators are based overseas? Elections are won and lost on the basis of the information we see. There used to be very strict rules about what information the public was allowed to see during elections, and it was all carefully monitored by a very imperfect, but at least monitored and controlled media system. And now it's a complete free-for-all. And so the institutions that are supposed to help us, that we're supposed to trust, seem to fail. And then it's little wonder that people start not trusting them about anything. Why should we trust any of these? So let's just throw everything up in the air and try again. And so I think that there are many, many things going on at once here.
Do you have any ideas how these institutions can modernize?
No, because I've been talking about it for 15 years and I still don't know. I mean, I look at it in a really abstract way, I suppose. Representative democracy has been around for, it's hard to put an exact number on it, but you could say 100, let's say 100 years or so. Broad-based mass participation, universal suffrage, representative democracy which relies on a certain number of other assumptions for it to really work, about informed citizens, a free and fair press, a generally large middle class who belong to political parties, so the political parties don't get captured by a small fringe. And you have all these sort of assumptions that are sort of silent in the background. Um, the feedback mechanism between members of parliament and the people, and you have all these systems that also make representative democracy work, and they've all been built up over 100 years. And all I think is the way that the information world now works, it renders many of those systems kind of ineffective. And you live in a world where you, Tom and Santi, you can have almost anything you want at the click of a button. Any food you want can be delivered to you. You can consume any media you want. You can get advice about anything. You can communicate with anyone. You can take photographs and share it with the world. And yet, our political system does not feel like it offers the same degree of choice and input. You vote once every 4 to 5 years, maybe, and that's kind of it. It just feels desperately out of sync. And at some point, I don't think your generation are going to put up with voting once every 4 to 5 years. I think you're going to say this is just ridiculous. This is a vestige of 100 years ago. We live in a different world now. We need a radical overhaul. We need a different voting system. We need way more individual engagement and involvement. We might need mandatory voting for everybody, and you have to vote on many more referendums. Elections shouldn't be just a tick in a box anymore. You should have the chance to give a lot of feedback about how you're feeling about the election and how the performance of the previous parties. Who knows? I don't really know what it would be, but I think it's going to have to, democracies should have to reflect in some way the reality of the world around. And it feels like at the moment it doesn't.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and that could also explain why legislation very rarely keeps up with evolving technology because it is a very long process with a lot of bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. And I think that causes a lot of frustration. I mean, I don't want to get party political about it, but I see the current Labour government trying to do certain things that they have promised 2 years into a mandate after 13 years out of power, and a significant amount of frustration, both from the public and their own backbenchers, that things aren't changing quickly enough. And I think that is because we live in a world where we now expect everything to happen immediately, because with digital technology, things happen so fast. And so I don't know exactly what the answer is. It will involve somehow increased speed, increased involvement, more choice. I can see the sort of principles of it. I can't really work out what the mechanism precisely would be.
But surely, to be fair, studies have been done which suggest that certain members of our generation don't want democracy at all.
Yeah.
They want some form of, they want this idea of a strong leader, and they think that'll be the answer to their problems. And in many ways, history is perhaps repeating itself.
Yes.
But fundamentally, is that a suggestion more that technology is the issue or that humans desire instant gratification?
Yeah. Or perhaps the fact that technology gives instant gratification in some ways and fuels our desire for it further, perhaps. I mean, I think that the desire for the strongman, which I did write about in 2018, funny enough, I wrote a book called The People versus Tech, where my argument was if democracy increasingly feels to people like it can't respond properly to the challenges of the time. People want law and order. People want to feel like things are in control. People want to feel like when they're upset about something, there is a fast feedback mechanism which is reflected by what the government does. If it can't deliver that, and if it can't deliver economic growth and well-being, people will want a strong man. And I think the desire for the strong man that you've seen across the world in the last 20 years or so is a rejection of democracy rather than necessarily just a desire for the strong man. It's a feeling that system doesn't seem to work anymore. We don't get economic growth. We can't control borders. We can't control technology. Everything's spiraling out of control. Nothing seems to work anymore. Maybe there may be some big man at the top who's got the strength and power and courage to shake the system up and force his or her will on the world. That's the thing that can work because it used to be when the world seemed to be divided into two great blocks between democracies and autocracies, the autocracies didn't work. And people that lived in autocracies looked over at democracies that were growing 3, 4, 5% a year, where people seemed to be happy and were increasing their well-being and wealth, and thought, we want that. They didn't want strong men because the strong men wouldn't listen to them. And nothing got done because of these horrible giant bureaucracies, which were totally controlled by the people in charge. And they looked longingly at democracies. And unfortunately, it feels like it's kind of got into reverse. And I can't blame any one thing, but it is a sense that democracies just simply don't work anymore, as well as at least not as well as they used to.
So,
Yeah,
what is the alternative?
You tell me. I mean, I want you. I'm hoping you guys are going to figure this out, and I hope you didn't get me on this to give you an answer to that. Like I
Well,
said, I mean, the only thing I can think of is a great refresh in lots of ways in how our democracy works. Not tinkering around the edges, but something quite dramatic and revolutionary. History tells you that it is not my generation that forces revolutionary change. It is people in their 20s who do that, who haven't become all tired out and exhausted and naysaying and have children and all these other problems. It is the younger generation that works out what needs to be changed and has the energy to do it.
yeah, and
but
like you're
it's
saying,
Sorry, it's interesting you mentioned that because there's this study that suggests that people form their political beliefs between their 20s and 30s and start sort of engaging with the political system at an early age at around 16 when they start voting. Then they drop off, but as they get older, they drop in again. However, at times of political hostility, when they perceive politics to be divisive, they don't engage at all. So is there just a risk that they don't come up with these answers?
Yeah, I guess there probably is, and I didn't know about that study. Um, I suppose it also comes down to what you think of as political. When I look around, I often see people who aren't political, but they're often doing things that could feel quite political. It feels to me like more and more individual choices you make, whether you fly, where you buy your food from, what websites you use, are in some ways increasingly a reflection of your political values, even if you don't join a party or even if you don't vote or read the daily news. It is increasingly because of the extra choice you have, your generation is able to make more political choices in the things that you do every day. And I hope that is then in some ways is able to be reflected back or to somehow be put into a a sort of a formal political system that we do need. But I don't know is the simple answer.
So, like
Sorry,
you said yourself, it probably won't be your generation that brings the change. It might be me and Santi's, but also may very well be the generation after us. So, do you think that education should play a bigger role in moving forward?
Don't try and get out of it by pushing it onto the next ones. Um, the way the education system will probably need to be reformed is a giant question. And if you look at the history of efforts to even change the national curriculum by 1 centimeter, it is incredibly contentious.
Mm.
I mean, my view is that the arrival of large language models, I have a book about this at the moment, is going to force the education system to change quite dramatically, more than any other thing, because suddenly, I don't know the how much you two use language models in your assignments, in your writing. I mean, I assume you do in some ways. You're obviously
very
thinking.
rarely.
You're
It's
obviously
I try to avoid it actually, but
you guys are thoughtful. You guys are thinking about this hard. But when I was in my late teens or early 20s, I would have used language models in my work. And statistics suggest 60, 70% of students are using them frequently, which doesn't surprise me at all, which is obviously going to cause giant problems in the transmission of knowledge. The relationship between effort and output has essentially now been completely, almost anyway, destroyed. It's very hard for teachers to understand or judge or gauge someone's level of knowledge or understanding. Has to be done in completely new ways. And I think it's going to hopefully force a deeper consideration of how can we change the education system to genuinely be suited for the things that are coming down the line. And that will include political engagement and the political responsibilities on citizens.
But the issue there is that educators are currently having these conversations about how to navigate AI and how to alleviate sort of issues like plagiarism, and their response is move back to solid sit-down exams, which poses ethical concerns about accessibility. So how should we respond? What do we can we do to ensure that plagiarism is navigated, but the accessibility isn't hindered and the way people learn is catered for?
Yeah. It's not, I don't think the answer is going to be to go back to just simply written exams. I think there will be an explosion of different ways that different places try and respond to this. There may be efforts to go back to not just written sit down exams, but more oral examinations of various types. I don't think teachers can or should pretend these language models don't exist either. I think they're going to have to show people how to use them and how to make sure they use them in a way, not just about plagiarism, but how to make sure you're not cognitively offloading all the difficult tasks to a machine and therefore leaving school with good grades, but no genuine grasp or understanding of any concepts or any ideas. And that is going to involve, I think, some quite sophisticated ways of teaching kids about their use. I hear of teachers who set students exams, allow them to use a language model, in fact, ask them to use a language model, and then tell them that the actual task at hand is for them to critique the output of the language model. And that's the way they're trying to gauge and then discuss it with them in person. And that's the way they're trying to make sure they can accurately gauge a student's level of knowledge and understanding. There are ways of using language models that I think could really, really improve accessibility to people. I mean, if statistics are right and something like 1 in 5 people are neurodiverse in the UK in one way or another, an awful lot of written material does not cater to those groups. And language models are actually extremely good at very quickly translating material into styles and formats that could suit almost anyone as they would need it for themselves. If you can combine that with some more traditional ways of teaching and examining, I think that it could actually be quite incredible. It's going to take a long time because you're talking about an entire generation of teachers having to suddenly learn something new as well. So this isn't an overnight fix. but I think there is enough potential there to be mildly optimistic. And well, let me say this, to not be extremely pessimistic like a lot of people are.
Absolutely. And before the next question, just wanted a time check. You still fine for us to go on? Yeah.
Yeah, if we could, yeah, maybe another 5 or 10.
Okay, perfect. But on what
Okay,
you're just
lovely.
saying there, like an increasing normalization of AI into everyday life, and pairing that with this environment of mistrust and also feeling like institutions are failing, not to play devil's advocate here, could AI be the answer to that, seeing as it is instant? Could people buy into the AI dream, as it were, as an alternative? Or do you think their mistrust might also translate into adopting this?
It's going to be interesting. I mean, I've written this whole book. It's called How to Talk to AI and How Not to. And I see the great risk is if you are someone who is willing to use a language model in a very particular way. You use it as a learning assistant, as a devil's advocate, as someone, as a personal tutor and you yourself have a very open mind about its limitations. You have an open mind about how you could learn from it. You are actively seeking to avoid cognitively offloading every difficult task to it, but use it to help you understand concepts when you're struggling. It could be a way of like, there's a lot of political disagreement in the country at the moment. One of the reasons for that is because people don't seem to talk to each other in person anymore. And we don't see the world through other people's eyes. We like to think we do, but we really don't. Language models are ways of trying to understand where other people's perspectives are coming from. They can be amazing at that. If you could use a language model in all of those different ways, um, it could be really, really good as a possible solution to some of the problems that we are currently facing. However, are the incentives of the company set up to allow us to do that? Are we taught properly how to do that? Is it in our instinct to do that, or is our instinct to cut corners quickly, to plagiarize stuff, to get every difficult task done by a machine because we can't really be bothered? Sadly, I think that is the more likely outcome at the moment. Um, but that isn't to say it's not possible. And the reality is, what might be the deciding factor is the public opinion about these models. They are not very popular. People do not like AI. Your generation in particular, are you in your early 20s, you two?
I'm 22, yeah.
Yeah.
Tom's 23.
Yeah.
I'm still in the early as it stands.
From my understanding, Gen Z and particularly Gen Z do not like language models, extremely skeptical about the companies, skeptical about the environmental impact, skeptical about the what it's doing for job opportunities for your generation, and basically don't like them. And I can see already a sort of a big movement against these models, which I think is quite healthy because what I think it might do is force the hopefully politicians to think harder about where they're being implemented, where they're being deployed, what safety checks are done on them, rather than rushing headfirst, like we always seem to, in full scale adoption of everything and inject AI into the nation's veins and all everything's AI first, which is going to go really badly wrong. There's a lot of big risks that come with this. So I think the determining factor might partly be what not just Gen Z, I don't want to lay it all on you, you've got enough to worry about, but what the public opinion and attitude about these models really is, and how that is then reflected by what the politicians, the rules they set, and what the businesses decide to do. A lot of businesses are turning off AI because they realize the customers don't like it. They hate feeling like they're getting an AI answer, for example. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the next general election, if it is in 2029, it could be sooner, but if it is in 2029,
It'll be sooner.
it'll probably be sooner. But let's imagine for a second that this government lasts until 2029. AI and what we do with it could become one of the biggest subjects, what biggest dividing lines between the parties. And at the moment, I don't see any of them saying really anything much about it of any value. So the next 2 to 3 years could actually be really, really important.
Or to build on that, like you're saying, a lot of people are skeptical of the tech. probably based on they're afraid of the business's intent. Because I know, like a lot of technology, it's not necessarily the danger as that, it's the danger of the people using it. I just wondered, how do you think people might respond if it was a fully sentient AI? As in, it's not got an input from anyone else. Are people going to be more trusting because it's not being interfered with, or they're going to
No.
imagine like Skynet?
Well, I've just published a podcast with the Observer, 3 episodes. They're available already about the existential risk from AI. And sentience, questions about sentience or consciousness are really difficult because no one really understands what human consciousness is either, or even what human intelligence is fully. And so the idea we have going to have an answer for knowing when a machine's conscious or what that would look like or how that would be different, or whether it matters if it's conscious or whether we feel like it's conscious because that affects the way we talk to it. There's a million unanswered questions about that. I think the bigger sort of line is going to be one of two things. One, gradual further disruption of the workplace and of particularly very, very young kids having access to it and doing all sorts of dangerous things with it, or some mid-level catastrophic event. An AI agent goes rogue, out of control, accidentally brings down half the world's IT infrastructure, several days of enormous disruption and economic problems and humanitarian problems, and all the governments of the world have to get together and do something about it and figure out why this has happened and how to not let it happen again. They're the things that I think will drive a huge uptick in worry and political activism on this. It's already happening. Less so things like sentience, because no one is ever going to agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it'd be a very difficult one to answer, and it sounds like Sam Altman, but I was just wondering if humans are a problem, you remove them from the equation, if that might solve some of it. But like that's been 5 more minutes. You got any small questions, Santi?
Um, I was just thinking about how much that sounded like the Terminator. But apart from that,
Well, can I just say something about that? When you speak to the world's leading AI safety researchers and professors, including people that built technology that underpins these language models, they are all getting quite worried. And some of the scenarios that they seriously discuss are not dissimilar to Her, Terminator 2, Ex Machina. And there is an interesting reason for that. I mean, a lot of these movies, sci-fi storylines, were developed in conjunction or based on the advice of AI scientists. They haven't come out of thin air. And in the same way that actual modern technology, a lot of it was inspired by sci-fi in the beginning, like robotics, all inspired by Isaac Asimov. So the negative, terrifying consequences are also seen in sci-fi and should also be taken maybe more seriously than they are. And I think because it appeared in Terminator, the idea of some kind of out of control super intelligence deciding that humans are no value to them anymore, it sounds so absurd because we've seen it in a movie that we don't actually take it seriously. But a lot of serious scientists think we should take it seriously.
Hmm. Yeah,
right.
it's a very serious. Sorry,
It's
I
that
was just
AI
gonna say.
doesn't. Sorry, what? Sorry.
I was gonna say it's a very serious thing. But the biggest takeaway people can take away from this, if you know a Sarah Connor, gravitate towards her because it might be a useful connection in the future.
It's not that the AIs have gone evil or have gone sentient or have decided amongst themselves that we don't want humans. It would be that, according to the scientists that study this, it would be because they are extreme maximizing goal orientated systems. You give them a particular task, we already don't understand how they work. They're far too complex for us. And it's not impossible that they come up with a solution to that problem, whatever task you've asked them, in a way that we would never have wanted them to. And such that a silly example is go away and, help us solve climate change and weirdly deciding that the best way to do that would be to try to shut down all the world's energy grids. because no one told them to do that, but no one told them not to do that. And they had calculated in a way that's incomprehensible to us that that's the most efficient way of achieving the goal. So it doesn't require sentience, doesn't require self-awareness, doesn't require some secretive plan. It's almost an accident. And that is what the AI scientists worry about as we embed AI more and more and more into our systems without us really understanding how they work or how to avoid those kinds of problems.
So essentially what you're saying is that AI won't become self-aware like something like Skynet, for instance, but there's scope for it to make enough mistakes that it does cause a sort of doomsday event,
Big
if that
problem,
makes
yes.
sense. Yeah.
But not likely to happen, not probable by any means, but possible, I
Mm.
think is the way that a lot of the AI scientists think about it.
And with that cheery note, we'll end it
Yeah, I know.
there.
And on that bombshell, I mean, we've gone
Yeah,
totally off topic. But
To be
my point is, it could be that it does something like that in a small way, not like doomsday event, but there's some kind of, accidental leak of a novel strain of a virus, or there's some kind of accidental shutdown of some critical IT infrastructure that a lot of hospitals depend on because you've set off a coding agent to clean up your database and it accidentally decided to wipe something and then the whole system collapses. And it's so disruptive that it forces people to realize we don't want this. Like there'll be a political movement about it, or the politicians will say, we've got to get together and stop this ever happening again. And then suddenly AI becomes very, very political. And all the other worries and concerns we have about job losses and cognitive offloading might be solved through sudden, swift political action.
yeah. So I just want to say thank you, Jamie, for joining us today. It's been
Yeah,
very
thank you very
interesting.
much. That was I had a set of questions prepared, but I actually threw them all away because this line of conversation was so fascinating. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, you guys, and good luck with your work. I hope it goes really well. It's great to see people thinking deeply about this. So thank you for having me on.